Israel says it has killed more than 40 Palestinian militants over the past week during operations centered on Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. According to the Israeli military, the strikes focused on areas of Rafah currently under Israeli control, with a specific emphasis on locating and dismantling tunnel networks. The announcement comes as the Israel Defense Forces continue ground operations across multiple sectors of the Gaza Strip. In its latest update, the IDF said its units operating in Rafah identified what it described as militant cells, tunnel openings and underground routes. The military said these findings guided a series of targeted strikes and raids throughout the week. Officials stated that the combat teams involved included infantry, engineering units and armoured elements working in coordination. The IDF says the forces conducted systematic searches of structures and alleys with engineering equipment used to expose and destroy what it called operational tunnel routes. In its public briefing, the Israeli military reported that more than 40 militants were killed during these actions. The IDF said the number reflects engagements involving close-quarters clashes, precision strikes and the use of surveillance assets to identify hostile movements. No additional casualty details were released, and the statement did not specify the factions involved. Footage released by the Israeli army includes scenes said to show forces operating in dense urban areas of Rafah. According to the timestamps provided by the military, the material consists of two segments. The first runs from 0 to 0:34 and the second from 0:34 to 0:59. The IDF describes this footage as documenting its ground activities and aerial oversight in southern Gaza. The exact date of filming has not been disclosed. The military says the operations targeted areas where it believes Palestinian armed groups have regrouped and constructed new tunnel passages, despite earlier phases of the conflict in which Israel said it had dismantled a large portion of Gaza's underground network. The IDF states that identifying and destroying tunnels remains one of its primary objectives in Rafah due to the operational advantages they provide to militant factions. Israeli officials say forces in Rafah have been relying heavily on real-time intelligence from aerial surveillance and ground sensors to detect tunnel shafts and movement below the surface. Engineering teams are described as using specialized drilling and demolition equipment in locations where tunnels are suspected. The IDF says these activities are intended to prevent militants from using subterranean routes for transport, command functions or attacks. According to Israeli briefings, soldiers also encountered explosive devices and booby-trapped buildings during the week-long push. The IDF says its units neutralized these hazards as they advanced. No specific details on Israeli casualties or equipment losses were provided. The situation in Rafah has drawn international attention because the area hosts large numbers of displaced civilians. Humanitarian organizations have repeatedly expressed concern about ongoing military activity in the region. While the current IDF statement focuses exclusively on its operations against militants and tunnels, it does not address the humanitarian conditions or displacement patterns around Rafah during the same period. Throughout the week, the IDF reiterated its position that continued operations in Rafah are necessary to prevent Palestinian armed groups from re-establishing operational capabilities. Israeli military officials say tunnel systems in the southern Gaza Strip remain a strategic priority because they facilitate logistics and allow fighters to evade detection. The footage distributed by the IDF shows soldiers advancing through damaged structures, operating armoured vehicles and conducting controlled demolitions. The video also includes aerial scenes depicting strikes on what the army identifies as militant sites. The IDF says all activities depicted in the footage are part of its ongoing campaign to eliminate remaining militant infrastructure. No immediate response from Palestinian factions was included in the material provided. Local sources in Rafah have reported continued fighting in recent days, but independent verification of the specific engagements referenced by the IDF remains limited due to restricted access to the area. The Israeli military has emphasized that its count of more than 40 militants killed is based on operational assessments over the week-long period. The IDF did not release names, affiliations, or additional identifying details of those it described as militants. The Rafah operation is part of wider Israeli military activity across the Gaza Strip. The IDF continues to report engagements in central and northern Gaza as well, including operations aimed at what it says are remaining pockets of resistance. Israeli officials say the campaign will continue as long as militant groups retain operational capabilities, particularly those involving tunnel systems. The new update adds to a series of weekly briefings issued by the IDF outlining its objectives in the southern Gaza Strip. Israeli commanders have previously stated that Rafah remains one of the most complex areas of the conflict because of its dense urban layout and the presence of what they believe are intact underground routes used by Palestinian fighters. Military analysts note that tunnel networks have played a central role in Gaza conflicts for years. Israel has repeatedly targeted them as part of broader operations designed to limit the ability of armed groups to move fighters and equipment. The IDF says the tunnels discovered in Rafah during this week's operations demonstrate that Palestinian factions continue to invest in underground infrastructure despite sustained Israeli strikes. Humanitarian agencies have continued to report severe challenges in southern Gaza, including shortages of water, food, and medical supplies. While these conditions form part of the broader context of the conflict, the IDF statement released today does not address civilian impacts or humanitarian access. The footage distributed by the IDF is presented without audio and focuses on tactical movements, coordinated advances, and the demolition of targeted structures. The military describes the material as evidence of its progress in dismantling militant capabilities in Rafah. As the week-long assessment concludes, the Israeli military maintains that its operations have significantly degraded what it calls militant activity in the southern Gaza Strip. In summarizing the update, the IDF stated that more than 40 terrorists were eliminated over the past week in Rafah. Israel says it will continue focusing on Rafah in the coming days as part of efforts to identify undisclosed tunnel routes and neutralize remaining militant positions. The military says its forces remain engaged in search operations, demolition tasks, and surveillance missions aimed at preventing renewed militant activity. With the latest announcement, the situation in Rafah remains defined by continuing Israeli military operations, restricted civilian access, and ongoing assessments of tunnel networks still believed to exist underground. The Israeli military says it has killed more than 40 militants in Rafah over the past week as operations targeting tunnel networks continue in the southern Gaza Strip. Israeli officials say further updates will be provided as operations continue, but for now, the military maintains that its focus in Rafah remains the identification of tunnel routes, the disruption of militant activity, and the consolidation of areas currently under its control. No timeline has been given for the completion of these efforts, and the situation on the ground remains fluid as the IDF continues its week-by-week assessments.